Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Van Ostren, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Energize STEM Learning with Makerspaces, sponsored by McGraw-Hill Education and featuring Simon Monk, John Rennie, and Hilary Maybaum. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the left-hand side, you will see a Q&A panel that you can use to submit questions or comments. Please feel free to submit these throughout the program. And finally, please note that today's program will be recorded and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on how to access the archived version. And now for some background on today's speakers. Simon Monk has a degree in cybernetics and computer science and a PhD in software engineering. After spending many years in software, he now writes books full-time. He mostly writes about electronics for makers. Some of his better-known books include Programming Arduino, Getting Started with Sketches, Programming the Raspberry Pi, and Hacking Electronics. He also helps his wife Linda, who runs monkmakes.com, that make and sell kits and other products related to Simon's books. Hilary Maybaum is a former research oceanographer with 16 years of experience in educational publishing, particularly for the web. She has authored several textbook supplements and is currently senior online editor at McGraw-Hill Education, where she oversees the day-to-day functioning of AccessScience, an award-winning digital science reference product. And John Rennie is the editorial director of McGraw-Hill Education's award-winning digital science reference, AccessScience. During the 30 years of his career as a science writer and editor, his work has appeared frequently in print, online, and broadcast media, and received recognition from the National Magazine Awards. In 2000, the Council of Scientific Society Presidents bestowed on him the Carl Sagan Award for Public Understanding of Science. With that, I'd like to turn things over to John.
Very much, Jen. Really very much appreciate that kind introduction. And I also have to say that it's very heartening to see such a big turnout among all of you in the audience today as we go into this discussion about opportunities in STEM learning and what ways in which we think the rise of the maker movement it is something that can be advantageous for the general public, and particularly the ways in which libraries can participate in that. It's really quite an extraordinary time. I'm very happy to say that in this conversation today, I do get to be here alongside Hilary and Simon, both of whom are doing extraordinary work. Simon, of course, you know, is a real superstar in this area of sort of do-it-yourself, hands-on science and technology, and Hilary's been doing a fantastic job in helping McGraw-Hill Education's AccessScience become the kind of outstanding science reference that we would like for it to be, and be involved in precisely this area. That's what I really want to speak to you about today. We all know that learning by doing has always been one of the strongest, most important kinds of pedagogical approaches. The amazing thing is that now with the rise of maker movement, there are some opportunities in that for that to apply itself to science as never before. And so that's really today. I'd like to start off by trying to talk about two of these trends that I think have been very significant in shaping societies, and of course what is going on in libraries, and how they have been affecting some of our recent focus here at McGraw-Hill Education, and some of the new ongoing activities of AccessScience. So let's start with this first obvious one, which is, as we've said, the rise of the maker movement. This is not specific to libraries. It's not specific to education. We're seeing a real grassroots level interest throughout the public in getting involved in trying to create technologies of a sort that up until fairly recently, many of us could only have participated in them as consumers and users of them. It's something that we're seeing in little children, and we're seeing it in teenagers, we're seeing it in adults, even senior citizens. People are finding various ways of participating in the maker movement. And of course, as so many of you know well, libraries have become very involved and started to create their own makerspaces because they do see the relevance of this and the ways, in fact, many of the kind of traditional activities and handicrafts that have often been practiced in spaces in libraries, how this has this sort of new relevance. So this is one trend that's certainly been shaping libraries of late. And of course, something else that has been a great concern for a long time is of course, the importance of STEM education and the rise of the importance in that. If I hope you will forgive the unavoidable cliche, which is the fact that we do indeed live in this extraordinary era of scientific discovery. The rate at which new discoveries is piling up is staggering. It's almost impossible to keep up with them, and the kinds of new discoveries that are being made are absolutely wondrous in every area. New discoveries in astronomy and in neuroscience, in the workings of the cell and our own genetics, and of course new technological accomplishments. Everything is constantly exploding. It's an extraordinary amount of new information that those who are going to be scientific professionals are asked to try to master. But it's something that even people who are not going on into science need to concern themselves with, because indeed the effect of all of that that rise of science and technology is that it pervades our lives more and more all the time. So we're finding ways in which even people who do not consider themselves scientists in any way still are every day confronted with important decisions about new kinds of technologies that they'll be using in their own lives. They have to understand new technologies, new medical technologies, as they affect the kinds of healthcare decisions that they'll be making. They are asked to vote on referenda about issues of power and the environment. At any time, we need increasingly to have some sort of good baseline understanding of science and technology in order to function well in society. What's therefore kind of tragic is that for so many people, we currently often fail to convey that science well, that a lot of people, they don't understand the science, which is understandable because it can be so complicated, but they may not even be aware of the wonders of it. They certainly may not relate to it, and they may, in whatever choices they're making about their future careers and so on, they may never see themselves playing a part in that, and that is a terrible loss. I know that I'm certainly one of many people who would feel that science can enrich our lives in countless ways. As we look out at the world with the scientific viewpoint, the world simply seems like a more beautiful, wonderful place, and that a scientific understanding is every bit as important in trying to have a life well lived as one that is informed appropriately by different areas of the humanities. So I would always, of course, defend and stand up for a better understanding of science simply on those grounds. But of course, we also all know the simple pragmatic importance of science too. It's just at the level of people's future earnings and the well-being of the economy. As the Department of Labor has estimated that more than half of the sustained economic expansion that the United States has seen since the mid-20th century can be laid at the feet of industries involved in science, technology, engineering, and math. Their contribution to economic growth in the past has been extraordinary, and we fully expect that to continue to be true moving into the future as well. And it's true for individuals. The sustained growth in different kinds of what have been the traditional STEM occupations is still seen as strong and growing and better than outside of a lot of other non-STEM areas. People going into STEM fields are often likely to be able to get higher wages than those who do not. But even all of that is basically built upon that conventional notion of STEM jobs being ones who are people going on into research or programming or engineering. But there was a very interesting study just a few years ago by the Brookings Institute, which observed that at this point, because of how pervasive science and technology has become in all of our lives and in all occupations, that a great many jobs that would not traditionally be classified as STEM occupations probably really do qualify. And by their estimate, really a fifth of all of the jobs in the U.S. job market these days involve a very significant understanding of science or technology or mathematics. And in fact, by that reckoning, then it's really a case that the number of jobs that require some kind of STEM knowledge has doubled in the century and a half since the Industrial Revolution. That's a fantastic transformation that we have seen in the role that science plays in everyday life, and therefore the tremendous importance that falls on libraries and schools as places that then are places where people are learning this. It's therefore especially tragic, if not beyond tragic, that the benefits of that are not as equally and well distributed across everyone in society as that we've seen. We've all are acquainted with this idea of the digital divide, that some people, that particularly along lines of race and class and gender lines, that we're seeing that oftentimes whole segments of the population can be shut out or underrepresented in their involvement in these different areas of science and engineering and other areas of technology or medicine. So we really need to try to do more to make sure that more people, and particularly more women, are not being shut out of scientific careers. There have been some important advances in that area, but there's still a lot more. We need to try to make sure that everyone in society has the opportunity to fully participate in this growing importance of science and technology, because they individually benefit, but all of us collectively benefit from having more bright minds at work on these sorts of problems. Now, the amazing thing is that because, again, of the ways in which the science and the technology have become more pervasive and easier to use, we've started to see that embodied in the maker movement. We've started to see ways in which now increasingly some kinds of projects that would have been almost impossible to imagine even being able to do at an industrial level. There are some kinds of technologies that now can be done by individuals, often extraordinarily affordably. Probably there's no better icon of the maker movement than the 3D printer, a device that can seem almost magical, at least at a distance. But we've also seen the rise of robotics, the fact that robotics has become a field that small children become interested in is fantastic. It's an extraordinary development that way in getting people more involved with these kinds of technologies, and we're also seeing other sorts of ways in which people can become involved with them through programming. We've seen the rise of these kind of low-cost microprocessors and appropriated and associated languages like the Arduino and the Raspberry Pi. We're also seeing other kinds of very simple modular electronics. The Little Bits kits is another one. It makes it very easy for those of us who might not have thought of ourselves as programmers or to be involved in designing circuits, for us to start to get engaged in that. And all of this is important because, again, it allows people to explore and be drawn into science and technology on a completely organic, natural level. It takes what are already their native interests, their native passions, and connects that up to a kind of science and technology that they will want to learn. And it's also an opportunity to demythologize the science and for people to feel empowered by this. So the rise of that as a sphere of activity, and as one that libraries can embrace by taking up makerspaces and encouraging different kinds of maker activities, is a fantastic one for everyone within the library world, but also for those of us who are involved in the educational community and trying to push more information out there. One of the obstacles, of course, is for librarians and faculty who do want to try to encourage this, to try to find the right sort of information that would help them foster this in the students and other young people that they're associated with. That's something that we at McGraw-Hill Education have become very excited about, and that those of us working on AccessScience are now starting to get involved with. Is we're seeing ways in which we can integrate that with our own AccessScience activities. And I think with that, let me turn things over to Hillary and tell us more about what AccessScience is doing with that.
Thanks so much, John, and hello, everybody. I want to echo John's thanks for being here today. So we at McGraw-Hill have been promoting maker activities as tools for spurring STEM learning for some time. And now we're integrating those activities into our digital learning platforms. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about one of those platforms, AccessScience. Now, just stepping back a little, you may be familiar with our Tab imprint, which is made up of do-it-yourself technology books for makers, hackers, and hobbyists interested in electronics, robotics, audio projects, and the like. Our Evil Genius series is especially popular with student inventors, and soon you'll be hearing from one of our Tab authors, Simon Monk. Recently, we were proud to introduce content from selected Tab books into our award-winning science reference database, AccessScience. Here, you're looking at the homepage of AccessScience, and in one of those little boxes under the Explore heading, you'll see a little robo guy with the word projects, which is our current entry point into this new content. Projects are essentially part of a virtual makerspace for users of the site, and like most maker activities, AccessScience projects are great for organically inspiring interest in STEM subjects and helping students see how science, math, and technical fields relate directly to their own interests. They offer project-based learning for students to explore real-world solutions or challenges. We select our projects for AccessScience based on their potential interest among students and their expected duration, usually from a day to a week in length. As you'll note here on our project's landing page, they have a variety of skill levels, as noted by those little asterisks or stars, and it depends on the nature of the required activities. And because they come from Tab books, we know that these projects are manageable, respected, and they've withstood the test of time. You'll note that we have a little red box in the right-hand column. This explains to users that projects are a brand new content type, and we are soliciting feedback from users to learn more about what they want and need from this digital content. Let's take a quick look at some sample projects you'll find on the site. This particular one happens to be one that Simon Monk created, and it comes from his book, 15 Dangerously Mad Projects for the Evil Genius. I just love that title. So how is each project set up on AccessScience? Well, you'll note that every project has a title, an author with the author's credentials, a brief introduction and description, a source material, or source book rather, and some related content on the right-hand side of the page. You'll see some related articles and related media. These all come from within AccessScience. You'll also see a detailed list of parts and tools needed to complete the project, including where you can get each part. You'll also find warnings and precautions as needed, step-by-step illustrated assembly instructions, and figures and diagrams to support those instructions. As I mentioned, we're actively soliciting feedback from AccessScience users, and we'll use this feedback to expand our collection and tweak the anatomy as needed. Right now, we're looking to expand our collection and make them indexable through our search engine, and our plan is to offer a critical mass of searchable projects by the first quarter of 2016. I hope you'll all visit AccessScience to check them out. And now I'd like to hand things over to Simon Monk, who will talk about his role in the Maker movement and STEM education.
Thank you very much, Hilary. I think one of the sort of sentences I picked up actually from John's talk was to demythologize science. And I think really the whole AccessScience approach really helps with this, because I think there's a real challenge for educators to look at educating through projects as much as through subjects. And I think because science sometimes has a perception of being too mathsy, people can actually find an easier way into the science if they have a project that they want to build. So they'll make it, and the ones who care and the ones who will become scientists are the ones who then want to look under the hood and see how it all works and take it apart and change it and make it their own. So I'm quite excited by this approach, because I know from my own children, they don't learn the same way as I do. I would go and buy a fundamental textbook and start reading it and working it out, and I'd be in a formal education setting. Whereas I know kids, they want to go straight to the solution. They want to find out how to do it, and then they come back into it at a later date and dig deeper as and when they need to backfill and work out how things work. So anyway, that's a little bit of a diversion. I've been writing for the Tab imprint, part of McGraw-Hill, for I think almost 5 years now, and I've sort of knocked up quite a few books over that period of time. And I suppose I'm quite like to just sort of share some of the sort of insights for the kind of things that people seem to like, and I think probably divide that into what makers want and what STEM educators want, or STEM participants want. And I think the biggest thing that really that makers want is a community. They want makerspaces, and they want an online community so that they can share their creations, get help and advice, and have access to expensive tools that you don't necessarily want or can afford to have in your own house. And of course, the laser cutter is a classic example of that, and the 3D printer too. I'm quite envious of what's happening in the States, where you're finding all these makerspaces in libraries. We're not really getting that in the UK yet. I would love to see it happen more here, but at the moment, libraries in the UK are pretty much more something where seniors go to keep warm. They're not really fulfilling their role, the public library system, in the way that they should be. But hopefully that will change. I think the other thing that makers want is components and materials to build with, which sort of ties into the idea that, as well as the material, some easy way of getting all the parts you need sort of becomes essential to that whole process, and kits for educators can help with that. And finally, of course, they want the content to tell them how to make projects, and I think breaking it up into just a bite-sized, project-sized chunks like the AccessScience is a good way of doing that. And I think, as I was saying before, people will make the projects, but if it's a project, let's say, about making an intruder alarm that happens to use a laser, then you can introduce all sorts of concepts about how laser light works. You can even sort of hang legal issues and property issues for a legal discussion off the same project. So I do think it's I think there is a sort of a little bit of a change in the air. I know some countries like Finland are very keen on switching over to much more of a topic-based education system rather than a subject-based education system. So I think STEM educators, they really want, in practical terms, they want educational resources. And when it really comes down to it, what they want is lesson plans that they can just take and entertain some kids for a few hours and teach them something useful and make some progress with what they're doing. The other thing I think that gets neglected is training for the educators, because to be able to teach this material, they themselves have got to become familiar with it. And it's often a teacher, always a teacher spends a lot of effort and time in the classroom and preparing material and just keeping up with what's going on, without having to cope with every new initiative that comes along and says, right, now you've all got to learn Python and show kids how to program Python on a Raspberry Pi. And now you've all got to learn electronics. And I know some teachers, and I know they find this frustrating. So I think, as well as material for the participants who are being taught. There's also teaching to be done for the teachers themselves, and as I mentioned before, kits and materials to help build the projects. Yeah, so I think that the sort of kind of different books that I end up writing, they do sort of fall into quite niche, into a number of different categories. There's the new technology book. So Raspberry Pi comes along, suddenly everybody needs to know how to use it. So it's good to get a book out there on that new technology. The new technologies keep coming along, and I think they're going to keep coming along for a while. So at the moment, everybody's excited about the Raspberry Pi and the Arduino, but then there's other things on the horizon, like the microbit that are set to, I think, make a big impact. So the other kind of book that people like are projects. So these are the project books are the ones whose projects end up finding their way into the AccessScience type scenario. But they also serve to provide inspiration and ideas. One of the technical editors on one of my books is the only thing he really takes from the books is, because he's quite practically skilled, is ideas for projects and neat tricks and nice ways of doing things. And then we come to the theory side of things. This is where you do the backfill. So you've built your project, you want to know more about how it works. So that's when, at some point, you start to want some more serious material that isn't just about the project. It's actually explaining how everything works for you. So this is where I get to plug some of my books. So just a quick survey over some of the kinds of books that I've written for McGraw-Hill education. So there's Programming the Raspberry Pi, and again, this is very much concentrates on writing Python and using it with the Raspberry Pi. A little bit of electronics in there to get people started with. I think there's perhaps 3 chapters where you can make something electronic, but most of it is about learning Python. Programming Arduino, a similar treatment, but for the Arduino board, and then a more advanced book, Programming Arduino Next Steps, which is really kind of for the experts who, once you've read Programming Arduino and you've made a few projects, this is where you get to learn the advanced stuff for Arduino. Then there's books that are sort of to do with theory and tools, and this is where you get to the backfilling or needing some serious skills area of things. So there's Practical Electronics for Inventors, which is I came in on the 3rd edition with Paul Schertz, and I'm just in the process of updating it to the 4th edition. And it's a terrific book. It's a big book. There's a lot of material in there, and most of that is down to Paul. I've kind of updated it and added a few new topics that have come up over recent years. It's a much loved book. People do like that book, and there's things in there for everybody. There's lots of techniques that you can pick up and use in practical setting. Hacking Electronics is my attempt at a much more accessible book for electronics. So this is really somebody who, this is back to demythologizing science. This is for people who haven't really done any science, don't really have any maths, but want to be able to play with electronics. And then perhaps want to be able to modify something they've got. They want to modify a little cupboard light so that it comes on automatically rather than you have to press a switch to turn it on. So there's how you can hack it and take it apart. Or they want to hack a little toy so that it has, when you can control it remotely and turn it on and off, other than just turning its on and off switch on, using its on and off switch. And then there are books about specific tools. And it's kind of things like how do you make your own circuit boards, or that kind of thing. Okay. So, and then there's out and out project books. And Hilary mentioned 15 Dangerously Mad Projects for the Evil Genius. This has some fun projects in it. It's got, some of them aren't anything to do with electronics. There's actually a trebuchet, which is a type of medieval siege engine. It'll throw an onion or a tennis ball for you, so it's not too dangerous. As long as you stand well clear when you're releasing it, that's the main safety concern. And then I have a couple of books to do with the Arduino as well, which are out and out project books, and they serve to provide just a step-by-step how-to build a particular project, or also, as I was saying before, to provide inspiration. You just look at something and think, oh yeah, I could just adapt that project a bit and do something different with it. A book that I wrote with my son, Matthew Monk, and Matthew was 15 when we first started writing this, and he actually wrote the bulk of it. I kind of helped with the programming, particularly the Java programming. And this is Minecraft Mastery. And I went to Minecon in London with Matthew a few months ago now, I suppose it was, and I was just so impressed by the uses that people were finding for Minecraft in education. People use it as a 3D modeling tool. It's probably the simplest 3D modeling tool to use in the world, and there are millions of children who can do the most fantastic modeling and create these incredible towns and worlds using the software. And there are engineering principles to be learnt as well. They're sort of artificial engineering principles. There's a thing called redstone, which is a bit like electronics, but it's not quite electronics. It's a bit sort of, it doesn't quite work the same way, but it does teach you how to learn about that kind of thing and how to build really complex systems and the things that are going to trip up and get you when you try and do it. People use it for animations, and then they use it for programming in various different ways. You can actually mod the program itself so that you add extra blocks to it or change the way it works. There's a Minecraft Pi edition for the Raspberry Pi, which has a nice little Python interface, and people have done great projects using that, so that you can have a little Python console connected to your Raspberry Pi server, so your Raspberry Pi Minecraft server, and you can send it commands to. You can write a little for loop that creates a staircase, because it just plonks blocks incrementing the y and the x-axis each time. There's even a mod for Minecraft called QCraft, which actually teaches quantum mechanics in a very interesting and exciting way. It's not really quantum mechanics. You learn about, but you do learn sort of about entanglement, and you can sort of have blocks and superposition, and you can create blocks that change appearance when you turn away, and when you look back again, there's something different. So it's kind of a fun take on some of the sort of quite difficult to grasp concepts that are in quantum mechanics. And there's also Computercraft, which is, again, this is being pushed for education by the guy who created it originally. And he's using this in an education system using the Lua programming language. So the idea is, within your Minecraft world, you have a computer, and you can program it to do things, and you can attach it. You can, as well as a computer that's stationary, you can also have a little mobile computer that will run along creating blocks as it goes, or doing various programmed tasks. So it's quite a very powerful tool, I think, Minecraft. So currently what I'm working on for TAB, I'm really getting into a sort of phase of next editions, really. So I'm joining in on Teach Yourself Electricity and Electronics, the 6th edition, which is the great book that Stan Gibiliscu has wrote some years ago, and I'm really sort of bringing it up to date with some of the new advances like Arduino, and some of the new techniques that perhaps rely more on integrated circuits than discrete electronics. I'm also doing a new edition of Practical Electronics for Inventors, again with Paul Schertz, and a new edition of Programming the Raspberry Pi to bring it up to date for things like the Raspberry Pi 2, and the same thing for Programming Arduino, just a general update for these different books. One other thing that I'm doing sort of relates a little bit to this is that I'm involved with monkmakes.com, and the idea, it's really in response to the question I get asked most about people who've got my books, and that is, where can I buy the parts from? And we have quite a few different kind of kits of parts, some of them focused on books. So Hacking Electronics, one of the books I mentioned earlier, has a kit that goes with it. And it just helps people get started, because if you ever looked through an electronics catalogue or an online electronics catalogue, it's just so difficult to find exactly the thing you want. You're generally swamped by far too much choice. So the idea is just to kind of give people what they need. We've taken that a step further with the electronic starter kit for Raspberry Pi, which sort of includes 10 lesson cards. So this is taken up very well in the UK and Europe, and it's now available on Amazon.com in the States as well. And it's quite popular with educators because they can kind of have, they've basically got 10 lesson plans there that they can take the kids through and get them building something electronic using a Raspberry Pi. And we've tried to make it as accessible and easy to use as possible. Okay, and that's available on makers.com and also Amazon.com. That's really the end of my presentation. I just left a few contact details on there. I'm always glad to hear from people who've got questions about my books or even who've got wacky project ideas. So get in touch if you'd like to. And I think I'll hand back to John now. Thank you for listening.
Great. No, thank you very much, Simon. So yes, it's absolutely, it's a real pleasure to get to work with Simon, who is such a superstar within the sphere of developing this sort of content, and for us to be working on trying to bring this kind of content into AccessScience. We think that's great. You know, the wonderful sort of marriage made in heaven to our mind about this sort of thing is that this gives us an opportunity to bring together that learning by doing part of the maker experience, and then to also to put that directly into context with the kind of authoritative, well-vetted information about science and technology that AccessScience has so well. In the kind of presentation that Hillary was showing previously, it's great that it makes it possible for people when they are, for example, learning about a particular area of whether they're studying, say light in a science class, and or they want to know more about light as a wave, that there would be relevant sorts of projects that they could learn about that would help to reinforce those points. And similarly, if their interest happens to have been in a particular project that's using lasers, for example, to try to create some kind of burglar alarm, well, it makes it very possible then for them to use that opportunity of that interest to immediately then jump over to relevant sorts of information about light and why do lasers behave as they do. So that's sort of really the aim of what we're doing. At this point, we're very happy to answer any kinds of questions that you may have for us. I saw there was one great question or comment that came up previously that I just wanted to address. Some people were responding to that. I was referring, of course, to STEM learning, and they were saying, well, you know, when we often refer to STEAM learning, bringing in that A of the arts in along with the rest of the science, the technology, the engineering, and mathematics. I completely agree. I think all of us here at McGraw-Hill Education absolutely believe that the best way to trying to talk about any of these subjects is to try to show them in a context where they are connected to both those artistic expressions. The creativity and imagination in any form is relevant to all of these areas. I think we want to encourage exactly that kind of crossover. We often still say STEM because it's still so often the term of art that's most often used in our conversations, but in any of these, yes, I'm always happy to talk about the issue of STEAM. Let's see. There was also a question that had come up as someone was curious about safety concerns, which is always a great issue. The question of when we're presenting these sorts of do-it-yourself projects and people are using tools and so on, do we provide some sort of good information about safety considerations? That's something that's always been there in the tab. Would you like to talk a little bit about how we're dealing with the safety considerations in the AccessScience presentation?
Sure, John. So as I mentioned, you might have heard it, we do have safety precautions prominently displayed on AccessScience where they're needed. For example, in the project for the laser grid intruder alarm, we have a very red and bold statement in large type that says, you know, danger, you should never point lasers at your face, and, you know, be cautious about how you use them and where you point them. So yes, and often in our tool list, we will have safety goggles and other safety equipment that the maker will need during the process, especially if there's a lot of sawing or, you know, welding, that kind of thing.
Yeah, as people, as you're going through the set of instructions on the projects, we actually are specifically putting in precisely those kinds of reminders and warnings where they show up, so they're getting them in context. It's one of the ways in which, in some ways, it's the kinds of thing that you can do more easily online than in a printed book. So we think that's great, but this is all part of the kind of adaptation that is involved for us, in that when we are taking some of the kind of content that is appearing in these tab books, and now we're bringing it over to AccessScience, that we're not just, it's not just sort of simple copy and paste. We're trying to make sure that it actually does live appropriately in the new space, and safety is very much one of our considerations. In fact, when people would be looking through lists of projects, one of the things that we make it very clear at the top is that we sort them out by issues of levels of difficulty, and also about some of the kinds of skills that would be involved, and as that relates directly to some of those kinds of safety considerations. As we're continuing to develop these projects for AccessScience, safety concerns are definitely going to be one of the things that are strongly in our mind. Let's see, I think, Simon, perhaps this is one I can throw over to you. The people were wondering about whether some of the kinds of kits that you were talking about that are available, that are out there, are these affordable for library systems that may be on a tight budget?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we try and keep the cost down as much as we can. So I think the price for the electronics starter kit for Raspberry Pi is, I think, $25 per kit. But one of the things we've done before is, if you have a classroom, you want a large quantity, then we can actually kind of repackage them slightly so that we can give you a kind of a classroom kit at a lower cost per student, as it were. Yeah, reasonable, I think, for what you're getting, especially if it can provide you with material that's going to last you for 10 lessons or so.
Yeah, it's always issues of speaking broadly to issues of affordability is always very difficult, because of course there's such a range of the kind of budgets that are involved. I think it's also relevant too that a lot of the, I think increasingly a lot of people who are involved with these sorts of maker projects, even if they are individually on their own doing some kinds of things, they may still be looking to come to the libraries as good sources of information about how to use them, how to execute the projects, safety considerations, and all of that is certainly very, very relevant. There was a question someone had been asking now, whether or not the entire contents of the tab books would be inside AccessScience. I think that's actually, at this point, the answer to that is no. In AccessScience, what we're doing is we're specifically taking and adapting individual projects, and in some cases commissioning all new projects that we can drop in and place into those. People who are interested in trying to get access to the wider range of the full content in those tab books, the Access Engineering product that McGraw-Hill Education offers is one which the tab books are being added to all of that in their entirety. So that's a sister platform to us, and certainly many subscribers to AccessScience are also subscribers to Access Engineering as well. Let's see. Let's see, there is a question about working on a grant opportunity to initiate a brand new makerspace. What kinds of resources would we recommend? Well, okay, so that's a great one. Let's see, well, of course, we would start off, of course, by talking about AccessScience as one that's relevant. Simon, would you have any thoughts about good other places for institutions that are looking to try to get started in creating makerspaces, good places to turn for that sort of information?
Yeah, I think I don't know if the question relates purely to information or whether you're sort of also interested in what kind of equipment you should have for your makerspace. But I think in terms of materials, I mean, obviously, always going to, I mean, your libraries, right? So I think you're always going to want to have books that relate to the topics. And I think there's something quite nice about being able to, you know, get a book down and have a few people cluster around it and work out what they're trying to do, or somebody comes in with a question because they want to make something and a few people think, you know what, I think there was a project in a book back there that's a little bit like what you want. There's you know, obviously the internet as well, people will dive onto YouTube and find out ways of doing things. I think in terms of sort of hardware, whenever I go to a makerspace or a fab lab, I go to the local fab lab in Manchester, there's always a big queue for the laser cutter. That's the thing that people love to play with. People will sometimes have something they want to do on the 3D printer, but generally I'd say get lots of laser cutters. That's what people find really useful a lot of the time. You know, the novelty tends just to wear off a little bit on the 3D printing after a while, and the 3D modeling software isn't always the easiest thing to use in the world. Everything's suddenly gone quiet. Yeah, well, I think you know, makerspaces are a fantastic way of getting people into building things, because I think in the classroom it's funny because, you know, people often sort of say, well, you know, I get taught things at school, but what I really learn are the things that I do at home, the things that you know, Minecraft in the evening when I play, or visiting you know, a makerspace and talking to other people who create things, and starting to think about ideas for things I could make myself. I mean, one of the things we do with the electronic starter kit is we have a teacher, a friend of ours actually, who will go into schools and just run an exercise with teachers to show them how to use a Raspberry Pi to start connecting to some electronics, and get them enthusiastic about it, so that they can then, you know, take that on and show the kids how to do it as well.
Yeah, it's been very interesting in a lot of the panel discussions that we've had on this subject, and when we've been speaking to both to some people who are leaders of the maker movement, but also to a lot of librarians who have been at the forefront of this. One of the ideas that comes up over and over again is just how important the community itself as a resource is. That in many cases, the people who are the best sources of information about this may in some cases be you know, 9-year-old children who have extensive use on, for example, how to program the laser cutters or use the 3D printers, and that a lot of that kind of information and that sort of experience and source of labor is very important to be able to draw on, because of course for a lot of these kinds of tools there is considerable amount of upkeep that may be involved in that. But again, you know, I think it's always important to remember that although I always kind of think of things like 3D printers or even the programmable laser cutters as being sort of the charismatic megafauna of the maker movement. They're the big glamorous things that people look at a lot. But a lot of the maker movement, a lot of these things can be driven by much more modest, low-cost activities. There's a great example of that. Some librarians have talked about how sewing, for example, that if you are sewing different projects and you use metal thread, and you can use that to connect up to different sorts of LEDs, that you can create a variety of fascinating programmable textile products, and that really all that's involved in that is just nothing more than old-fashioned sewing technologies. So there are lower cost ways that it is possible to use to get into any of these things. Let's see, what are some of the other thoughts that people have here? One question is, so are there school systems where these kinds of kits are used regularly? Are these mostly K through 12 or higher education? Simon, what in your experience with this how do they tend to be used?
Okay, well, the teacher I mentioned just before, who goes around mostly training other teachers, he tends to, I think, by a natural process of self-selection, really, they tend to be the teachers who are particularly interested in this technology, and they will sometimes run them as after-school clubs, and sometimes sort of work them into the curriculum. I just noticed another question on there about whether the kits are reusable. Yes, they are, absolutely. And what tends to happen is he'll take his box of kits and he'll get people experimenting with them, playing with them, and then they all go back in the box, and then they come out again for another session, maybe at another school or even at the same school. And gradually things start to disappear and they have to be replenished. But yeah, it's as a resource, I think that the key thing is getting people doing something, doing anything. Just touching something and making something is a very powerful thing to do. I'm always struck by how impressed people are when they get an LED to blink.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a computer with a screen and you can have all sorts of fantastic graphics on there, and you've got billions of LEDs on this screen, but you connect a little LED to a Raspberry Pi and you type a little bit of a program that turns it on, waits for a second, turns it off, and repeats, and people just love it. That's something real. The computer isn't really a real thing. That's just where you run programs that other people have written. But an LED or a push button that does something, that's real. And it's fascinating to see that's how people take to that.
Yeah, that's it's very true. Great question from Maria Mina about do you have suggestions on how libraries can overcome the lack of technology or science expertise in their own staffs? Great question. This is again something that's come up a number of times on some of the panels discussions that we've had about this. It can often, we know, be very awkward for librarians who, as they've professionally been people who know things, to be in the maybe potentially awkward position of not having a kind of expertise that some people looking to them might hope they would have. A lot of the great thing about this maker movement is the fact that a lot of it is predisposed to be open access, that a lot of information is online. So I think when librarians use their awesome library researching skills, you can find a lot of this information. I think that the biggest part of it is exactly something Simon was saying, which is for people to overcome that resistance of being worried about that they'd be jumping into something that would be too hard, that it is something that people can get involved in these areas. You can learn some of these skills. Try to find something that they think they would be comfortable with as a way of getting started, and use that as the entry point into more ambitious maker activities thereafter. That, after all, is what we're ultimately hoping all of the users of the libraries will be doing when we're using these as a jumping off point for more scientific and technological understanding too.
If I just jump in there, John, I think that's absolutely right. And I think one of the ways that let's say you're a librarian and you're not necessarily that skilled in this technology, you're not going to be the expert always in there, but that doesn't necessarily matter. I think you can kind of be in the moderator role, in the facilitator role. So what you could do is you have a project that you want to make, and the kit of parts, let's say, to support that. And you work out how to do it, and then because you've got that knowledge, you can lead people through that without necessarily having to have the in-depth knowledge. It's you know, you're kind of moderating it and you're kind of facilitating it and allowing it to happen and providing the materials. And so what if you find the kids are actually better at the Python programming than you? It doesn't matter. So I think it's you know, that's another way you can kind of get into it. And the more you do this kind of thing, the more you'll take to it and the more you'll pick up, and you know, the more it'll become more natural rather than kind of leading a training exercise. So I think that's what I would say on that.
Yeah, no, it's great. Actually, it's one of our audience members has made a great comment. Erica Compton notes that librarians do not need to be scientific experts. They just need to know how to guide the learning and ask the right questions. And that's, of course, exactly the great role that they can play, and that we hope that that all of you will be inclined to play as you you move on now and try to develop these activities to encourage more scientific and engineering understanding and just a fuller sense of life overall among all of your own users. With that, let me thank all of you for your attention and turn things back over to you, Jen, to close us out.
Okay, thank you so much, John. And thanks to all of our presenters today. I want to give you all a virtual round of applause for spending time with us and sharing some great information. And as a reminder, we have recorded today's program, so please be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice that will include instructions on how to access that archived version. Thanks again to all our participants, and I hope you enjoyed today's session. Have a great rest of the day.